unlike solder, this is not going to burn you. You don't have to worry about any of the fumes. In no time at all, you make circuits work and it'll be permanent. Hello, this is BJ from Hearns Hobbies, and today I've got a little tutorial with this particular product which I think is quite a game changer. Now this is a little bottle of conductive paint from Green Stuff World. Now when it first came out, I thought it's a really good idea, but I haven't really had a chance to actually use it and see what the properties are like. Now I have played around with it, and it's actually quite enlightening and a very, very handy material. So what it is, it's a paint with metallic flecks which are conductive inside, and it's water-based, so it's easy to clean up, and you just paint it on the surface where you would like a wire to be, and it becomes conductive. So let me just show you what I have prepared here. So let me just bring this across here. There we go. Now I've made a little board out of just some plastic card, and you may see the conductive paint is actually this strip I've got across the top, and I've used it to make these two strips here for a circuit as well. Now it's quite easy to do this. I just had some masking tape, mask the top and bottom sections, and then I just used a brush and just stippled it on. So it's a very thick paint. It's quite lumpy because of all the conductive particles inside. And I found that stippling it on worked better because it wasn't pushing the paint and leaving any bald spots. So I just basically painted it on with a stipple action, so just pressing it down like so. And then once that first coat dried, I'll put on another one because there were some spots where I could see some of the white plastic coming through. And I think it would just be a lot more reliable if it was all a uniform metallic finish. Okay, so what I've done is I've got one strip across the top, and then I have a standard piece of wire across the bottom here. And the idea behind this is so I can demonstrate basically the differences in the electrical properties between this and the wire. But before I do so, let me just plug this into some power and I'll show you how it's already working. So over here I've got the two rails. The bottom one is the negative. I've got that connected onto a little plug which is going to accept my little red JST here from this LiPo battery. Okay, so it's 7.4 volts. There's a resistor here, so every LED light needs a resistor, and I actually have the tiniest little LED there. It's not the absolute tiniest you can get, but it's a 1mm by 1.5mm, which you may be able to see just there. And all I've done here is, this is particularly handy for people who don't want to solder or don't like to solder, or thinking that soldering is perhaps very difficult. I mean, you do need to get a soldering iron, it is very hot. So this is a very easy method of doing electrical circuits. So the plug itself, the black section of it has been super glued or cyanoacrylated onto the plastic, and the two contacts are just been bent so they touch the plastic, and then the paint has just been hand painted to these points of those contacts. And then along here we have the resistor, and one tail is just touching here and some paint's been added to that to join it onto this rail. And then across here we have the LED, same thing. We just brush painted some conductive paint to join this circuit. Now when I plug this together, the LED lights up. Now, it's probably going to be more noticeable if I do this. Okay, so very simple to do. All right, now this is particularly handy because if you like to add lights to your models, and with these very tiny LEDs, it's really easy to add them in now. The hardest bit was the wiring and the soldering, but that again was the conductive paint, and just seeing how basic this little circuit is to make, it puts it into the grasp of everyone now. Now LEDs are very easy to come by now. You can either get them pre-wired, which is the easiest way to get them. So these are the Green Stuff World ones, which have been pre-wired. There's the little LEDs down here, and then each wire comes with a pigtail, and then the resistor is already attached. Then basically you don't need to do any of this. You just need to attach the ends of the resistor and the end of the wire to your power supply, and it's ready to go. All right, apart from that actually, you can get them individually like this as well. So that's the one that I have here. It comes on this big roll and they're small chip LEDs. All right, so let's see, what shall I show you now? Let's look at the properties of these and I'll show you how that works in with how you design your circuit. So I guess we all know that wiring is the most common way of attaching an electrical circuit. Now let's just see the resistance of this. So you see here I've got it switched on, multimeter, and that's showing 0 ohms. Now if I touch this here, you'll see that resistance is 0.3 of an ohm. So that's very, very low indeed. And so that's why wiring is the best way to wire up any sort of electrical circuit. Actually, it's gone to 0.1 and it's gone down to 0. So it's actually very, very low. Okay, now when we compare it to the same length of the conductive paint, now you see it actually has quite a lot more resistance. It's 71 ohms for the same, actually, I just lost contact there. Let's hold it down a bit more. Okay, so it's about 70 ohms. So that's quite a lot more compared to this length of wire. So I mean, you just have to be aware that there is quite a bit more resistance within this conductive paint, but it's not a big problem. It's just that it shows that over long lengths, wire is still much more useful, because what's going to happen is if you use extended lengths of the conductive paint, by the time the power reaches a very long length, it's going to have a very diminished amount of power. The resistance is going to drop it down to a point where it may not be useful for your circuit anymore. But when you're doing very small sections like this, it's actually very negligible. So use wire where you can for long areas, but for the complicated parts, which is I think is where it's most useful, particularly these points where it's very tiny and you need to get to really small nooks and crannies, the conductive paint works extremely well. Okay, so just to give you an idea, if we measure the resistance of just this resistor, okay, so it's 467 ohms, and what this is doing is it's going to add another 34 ohms on this side. And over here, so it's adding another 70 ohms. So at the end of the day, what this is going to do is increasing the ohmage a little bit, which means the LED will probably be just a little bit dimmer than it would be if you were to use straight wire. But the ease of being able to use this just makes wiring so much easier. Okay, so that's the scientific part out of the way. Now, imagine if you had no soldering iron and you want to attach all these. Now, the particular paint, I've tried it on some wire here. What I've done is, this was bare wire, same as this one, just in white color. I've trimmed off the insulations from the ends, and I've just used the paint to hold them together. Now, it is holding together, but it's not the strongest bond. As you can see, it's starting to flex because it's actually a rubbery type of bond. You can see there, I've just broken it apart, but that was flexing. So it's not going to have the same strength as solder per se. So what you'll do is what I've done here. This wire's actually been super glued in place. So if you needed to join two pieces of wire, you'll super glue those in place first onto a base, and then you can use the conductive paint to make the circuit complete. So that's something to note as well. So it's not going to have much mechanical strength, but it's conductive properties that we're more interested in. Okay, so since you've seen me how I apply it here, let me just demonstrate putting on another light and the way I go about applying the paint and also the glue. Okay, so what I have here is, let's move this wire out of the way. All right, so here's a resistor, which is exactly the same as this resistor, bent it the same way. So it's bent so that when it sits on the flat surface, these 2 points are actually touching the surface as well. That's just to make it easier for the paint to make the circuit there. So I'm going to be gluing that on an area like so. And then I'm going to use one of these LEDs and just carefully pull out the LED. Okay, you can see how tiny that LED is right there. And I'll glue that on as well. And then we'll complete the circuit with the paint. Okay, so let me just get I need my mag visors, because without the mag visors I can't really see this small. Put those on. Okay, so I've got a little cap here, which I'm going to put some glue. So I'm just using some Zapper glue, but you can use anything similar. Any instant type glue that's not too thin. You want it to have some thickness to it so it doesn't run everywhere, because you don't want the super glue going all over your electronic contacts. All right, so I've got a little bit of that there. All right, so I'm just going to use a toothpick to apply. Now what I'll do is I'll put some glue onto the back of this resistor first. We'll glue it in place, and then we'll do the LED. So let me just get down here so I can see what I'm doing. All right, so we have some tweezers. So apply some glue on the back here. All right, so I'm gluing this down so that this particular point is touching this lower negative rail. Okay, so we'll just let that set a bit. Now I've got my tiny LED here. Now with these LEDs, they are marked on the back which side is positive and which side is negative. So let me just spin that over if I can. Now I'm not sure if you're able to see, it's really tiny perhaps. There will be some small marks on the back. So there's a line that goes across this way, and then there's a small line that goes across to the top. And where that's sort of, I guess it's this sort of shape, so where that's pointing, that's the negative direction. Okay, so I want that to be headed towards the bottom. So let me see. All right, so let me just spin that around. Okay, so I've got this like this now, so that means that the negative is this way. So I'm happy with this, and I'm just going to, let's just move this so it's easier to get my glue in place. Alright, so I just got to pick it up with my really small tweezers, get some glue, just right in the middle. I'll spin it over and we'll glue it in place here. Okay, so, oops. All right, here we go. I wonder if I can zoom that in more so you can see closer. That's the maximum I can do. All right, so here's the circuit that we had going before, and this is where I've just glued in the resistor and the LED. So if I connect up to a battery now, then only this one should work because I don't actually have the circuit finalized yet. We're going to do that with the conductive paint shortly. Okay, so you probably see that LED's on there. Okay, you notice that the other one's not switching on because it hasn't got a circuit yet. Okay, so we're going to complete the circuit now with some paint, and we'll see this all working. Okay, so I've got my conductive paint here. It needs to be shaken up really well. It comes with a little ball bearing inside to help you shake it up, so you can hear that. Now, let's just put this cap back over here. And when I pour it out, you see how thick and chunky it is. It's great that this is water-based because it doesn't have any strong smell to it, and it's easy to clean up in just some water. All right, so let's pop this over here. So see how it's come out in this big chunky blob? And I'm just going to use a toothpick again, just to apply it. Okay, so let's see here. So I'm going to use this to attach this lower part of the resistor to that rail. I'll put it on both sides. Now I'm putting it on quite liberally because we need to fill in a small gap because it is sitting up slightly higher. But because it's thick, it is easy to sort of fill that in. Okay, so I've got that. Now I'm going to apply the paint on this side of the resistor. Oh, sorry, not the resistor, the LED. Okay, so that's to the positive rail. And we'll just make sure that that's actually touching the contacts on the LED. And then I'll do this side so that it makes contact with the resistor. And we'll give it a few minutes and we'll let it dry. But you can see how this one's still working. And we'll give it some time to dry and we'll check the other one out. But while we're waiting, you can see how easy that was to apply. It's just that because it doesn't have any mechanical strength, we're relying on the components to be held in place with the super glue. And then the paint itself is just giving us that final contact. So, all right, we'll give it a little bit of time and we'll come back and we'll see how it goes. Okay, so we're giving it a few minutes to dry and I've checked it again and it's all working fine. So let me just cover this up so you can see. Now when we connect up our battery, you'll see it's all lit up. So it's as simple as so. So all I need to do, well all I did do, actually let me keep that covered. So all I have done is the resistor itself has been glued directly onto the surface, and then I've just made sure that all these leads have been bent in the right places to make the circuit. So this end one's been bent to meet this negative rail I've got on the bottom here, and then the top one's just been cut straight, and then that meets the end of the LED, and then the other end is on the top rail, which is positive. So there you go, simple. There you go. Now if you're new to LEDs, then some things to remember. LEDs have to have a resistor in the circuit. The LED needs to have the correct amount of current. And if it doesn't have the resistor, it'll get infinite amount of current and just pop, it'll just blow straight away. So you need to work out exactly the right amount of resistance. You can get it close enough. What it will do is once you're close enough, it'll just alter the brightness of the LED. So if it's a higher resistance, it'll look dimmer. If it's a lower resistance, it'll look brighter. But you have to be careful that it doesn't exceed its specs. So each LED also has specs. It will have a voltage range that it's meant to operate on. So these are operating at 2 volts. And then you'll be able to find an LED calculator. Just go to Google, type in LED calculator, and you'll be able to find the tool there to help you work out what resistance. So what you need to know is the voltage drop, which is, in this case, I'll put in 2 volts. And then they'll ask you what milliamp hour or current the LED will run on. And quite often LEDs won't state what they're rated at, but if you do 20 milliamps, it's pretty safe. And then you need to put in the value of the battery you're going to run. So this was 7.4 volts. So that's what I put into there. And then that gave me a result of around 330 ohms. These are actually around about the 400 ohm. So they're working fine. It just means they're dimmer than if they were running at the lower amperage. the lower ohm rating. So actually, it's amazing how bright these small LEDs can get. Okay, so there you go. So that's my tutorial on how to use the conductive paint from Green Stuff World. It's actually very simple and very, very handy. You can see how this little section here, you can quite easily put these LED lights. Particularly handy, I've seen them used on small figurines, like a tiny figurine like this, of a Star Wars figure. An LED was placed where the lightsaber was going to be, and then these rails were just hand painted roughly all the way down on the outside to the base, and then a battery was put into the actual round mini base, and that's how easy it is there. So let me just give you a quick example of what I've done previously. So this is a model. Let's see, I don't know if it's going to focus there. Let's zoom this out a bit. Okay, so this is a model I've done earlier, a diorama. And can you see? You can just see over here I've got an LED light there, and I've got one on the inside here. And how just these little lights can add so much more atmosphere. Looks much better if it was a lot darker. I've got the studio lights on at the moment, but there we go. So quite noticeable. Okay, just turn that off. All right, so there you go. That's the little guide on how to use, there's my little example there, how to use Green Stuff World conductive paint. So it's an amazing tool. So if I'm going to be lighting up, say, a little figurine, this is the best stuff to use, because quite often on a figurine you can't actually drill through it to get wires through. And with this you can just paint it on the outside. Now if you did have room, say you're doing a spaceship build or a car build and you want to do headlights, then you still use wire if you can, so regular wire. And then where it gets really complicated, say you're doing headlights for a car and it has two headlights, you can actually just glue the LED onto a backing plate like this, use conductive paint for making the circuit, and you just freehand it on. Doesn't really need to be really pretty, or if you want it really straight and neat looking, you can always do this. You can mask it up and you'll be able to see all the lines there. And then the components, you just need to glue them on to the surface, because the paint itself is not going to hold together like solder will. But unlike solder, this is not going to burn you. You don't have to worry about any of the fumes or any lead. And in no time at all, you can make circuits work and it'll be permanent. So there you go. So if you have any questions, because I'm sure some of you will have, please leave them in the comments and I'll get to them as soon as I can. So thank you for watching and good luck with your building with LEDs.